Okay, so I had to stop on the last little link that you guys were looking at because I'm limited to a certain amount of time, and I wanted to make sure I got all of this in. But where we ended, we were talking about that the Native Americans not cultivated, but domesticated the horse and began using it in its daily life. That was the most important thing, I think, that was exchanged from the Europeans to the Native Americans, that had a positive effect on the Native Americans. And it's because it did greatly improve the way they could move. They could move a lot faster, and they could take a lot more things with them when they did move. And so you see in this picture, you see different work animals. These are what would be called beasts of burden. They were beasts or animals that took the burden or the work off of people. And this was the first time that the Native Americans had really had that. So we'll just move on to the next slide. There's not a whole lot for me to say on this one. You're just going to have to pause it in just a second and fill in your answers. But these are all examples of things that were traded from the Americas to Europe, Asia, and Africa. Tend to focus more on Europe when we talk about the Columbian exchange, but Asia, such as China and India, were also included, and so was Africa. We just don't break it down into the different sections. We just group them into Americas and then Europe with Asia and Africa. So pause it here and fill in your notes. Okay, so you should have filled those notes in, and so I'm going to go on to the next one, and you basically have to do the same thing. But this was the opposite direction. This was things that came from Europe, Asia, and Africa to the Americas. So go ahead and pause it and get this one filled in on your notes, and then start it back when you finish. Okay, so the most important thing that you see here that had the biggest impact going from Europe, Asia, and Africa were diseases. It decimated the Native American population because they had no what? Was it that they didn't have? Immunity. They didn't have the immunity to fight off these diseases. So it was terrible for these tribes that it hit. Different foods. Exchange of foods, animals had dramatic impact on later societies. And what that means, they may have made these changes hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but it affects you today. Whatever you ate for breakfast or whatever you're going to eat for lunch was affected by the Columbian exchange, because almost everything that we eat on a daily basis has an ingredient from that was originated, that was native to the Americas, and ingredients that was native to either Europe, Africa, or Asia. And those ingredients have came together all these years later and have the dishes we have today. Over time, some of these crops that were native to the Americas, that the Native Americans had or the Indians had, became staples in the diets of Europeans. And so the Europeans because they had advanced so far and they had such a large population, they were beginning to run out of foods, and they were beginning to run out of great nutritional value in food. And so a lot of these foods came over from the Native Americans, such as the potato, and became super important in the daily meals and the daily nutrition of Europeans and other countries, of course. But one that comes to mind for me is the potato, which was something that Native Americans had, and it comes over and it's brought and it's introduced to Europe, and it becomes super popular in Ireland, and people began to get because it gives off so much nutritional value. People in Ireland specifically, but other places too, got a lot healthier because of it. And if you ever learned about the Irish potato famine, that was long after Columbian exchange. Potato has been introduced into Europe. Ireland's growing it. Ireland's getting healthy because they're eating it a lot in their diet, such as we do today. But then there's a disease it's something. There's a sickness that breaks out that keeps the plants from growing so well. I don't know if it was a mold or what it was, but anyway, the potatoes all die out. I think it was called blight, maybe, that had killed them. But so it dies out, and people begin to get really sick and begin to starve because now you've taken potatoes out of their daily diet. So make sure you get these copied in, and we're going to move on to the next slide. Columbian exchange affects also the economy today that we have. You see examples of that throughout the United States when you look at Texas and all the cattle ranching that takes place in Texas. But also, we see coffee. A lot of people drink coffee on a daily basis, or some type of coffee product, a product that has coffee in it, such as a Frappuccino from McDonald's or from Starbucks. Well, that wouldn't be possible in America today if it had not been for the Columbian Exchange, because we get a lot of our coffee from Brazil, and that is in South America, but the coffee bean was not was not here, and so it actually was brought over in exchange. Traditional cuisines changed because of Columbian Exchange, and if you go right up here, you'll see why. Can you imagine Italian food such as pizza or spaghetti without tomatoes? Until contact with the Americas, Europeans had never tried tomatoes. They didn't. It was not an Italian thing. It was over where the Indians were at in North America, and the Italians didn't have it. And remember, Italians are Europeans. Most Europeans were believed to think that tomatoes were poisonous because of the red color, and they didn't really want much of anything to do with it. They just thought it was odd for it to be red. By the late 1600s, though, tomatoes had begun to be included in Italian cookbooks. And so we can be thankful for that, because today we have pizza and spaghetti because the Italians actually began using tomatoes that were brought over from the Native Americans. The effects of Columbian Exchange felt not only in Europe, the Americas. For China, the arrival of easy-to-grow, nutritious corn helped the population grow tremendously. So corn became a big thing in China that they did not have because it came over from America. The Native Americans had it. And they also became the main consumer of silver that was mined in Americas. Now, that wasn't a food that was exchanged, but it was something that was used as currency, something that was valuable that was exchanged. Africa, two native crops of the Americas, corn, peanuts, still among the most widely grown in Africa. So those were things, corn and peanuts were things that were grown in the Americas. Africa did not have, and they have it today, and they still grow it today because it was imported over from Americas. Scholars estimate that a third of all food crops grown in the world were of American origin, meaning that they come out of either North America or South America. The introduction of new diseases, we've talked about this a little already. Native Americans had no natural resistance to European diseases. Their immune systems were not strong. They had no immune system. Smallpox, measles, influenza, or what we call the flu, and malaria killed millions of Native Americans. Population of central Mexico may have been decreased by more than 30% in the 10 years following the first Europeans that came over and had contact with North America. So it had not only impact here in what we know as the United States today, but it also had a great impact down into Mexico. Devastating impact. Native American population continued to decline for centuries. It wiped out so many of the Native Americans. The Inca Empire decreased from 13 million in 1492 when Christopher Columbus came over, and then they only had 2 million people left in 1600, which was about 108 years after Christopher Columbus came over. You had they lose 11 million people in 108 years. And so that was devastating. North American population fell from 2 million in 1492, which was when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, to 500,000 in 1900. But disease was not the only factor in decrease of the population. They also had wars and other violence that contributed to this decrease in people. So make sure you get all of your notes copied. Make sure you hang on to them because you're going to need them.